So sexual exceptionalism, he says, is singling out sexual sins as uniquely and especially corrupting for those who commit them. And what's interesting in his research, he says that this is a uniquely American Christian thing. Now, I have a friend who's from the Netherlands. Shout out to Lawrence, and Lawrence does a lot of talks to Christians about the issue of sexuality. And I remember he was describing to me how when he came from the Netherlands to America, he really saw this to be true, that we were overly obsessed with the issue of sex. And he was really communicating from his culture, from his country, and his background that it really wasn't that way. And so one of the things that our author here talks about is that how pastors in Africa, the issue of anger is seen of a much bigger sin than the issue of sexuality. So for whatever reason in the American church, we have put sexuality and sexual sin as the ultimate and the most pernicious sin, the thing you really don't want to be stuck with in your life. But yet, for a culture in American Christianity that wants to take this sin seriously, the research says we certainly have a lot of it in our midst, and that causes that incongruence, and that can cause a lot of hypocrisy in the church as well. Perhaps one of the reasons that we do take it so seriously, we take a verse like 1 Corinthians 6:18, which says, "Flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body." And so we take that and say that this sin has a unique consequence. You're sinning against your own body. Certainly, if you're in a marriage relationship, you are sinning against your spouse. And so we take that to believe that sexual sin has its own unique consequences, and so we kind of single it out as the biggest and greatest sin. Maybe we take something like the issue of God's judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 18 and 19. And Sodom and Gomorrah was known for its sexual wickedness, and God judged them. What's interesting, in the book of Ezekiel, when God is describing the sin of Sodom, he says this, "Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and the needy." And you actually have to go a few more verses before God mentions their abominations. And so here, was Sodom judged for their sin? Yeah. Part of the sin was pride, not taking care of the poor. The sexual sin, God mentioned not even first and foremost as why he judged them. And so one of the implications of us treating sexual sin in this way, he says, pastors in prospering churches, for example, are seldom fired for being cocky, ambitious, and overbearing. And this is part of the reason that he titled his book Addicted to Lust, that conservative Protestant Christians are addicted to the concept of lust. It's something we talk about a lot, we think about a lot. You fire your pastor immediately if he's struggling with something like this. Now, I actually don't recommend that. I think we need to help our ministers who struggle with these things. We don't want them to be forced to hide and not be willing to come and to share about some of these things. But a lot of times that can be true. The minute that they struggle with something like this, we kick them to the curb, and I think that's a great example of this sexual exceptionalism that he's talking about. This is Jason for Soulfire here on this channel. We want to offer gospel hope for a porn-filled world, reminding you that integrity is possible. And this War of the Soul episode certainly shows us that it isn't easy, but it is possible. And I will catch you in the next one.